Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. Got another Elestrals video for you. So, I've been, of course, like a lot of you, been poring over the recent Moonrise reveals, and two of the ones from this week were actually for the final two Lith cards, Heliolith and Necrolith. I was very eager to see what these cards did because the Liths have been a very prominent part of Elestrals so far, which makes sense because they are quite powerful cards. For those who aren't familiar with them, the quote-unquote Liths, because all of their name end with Lith, L-I-F, are a series of cards that can be actually normal cast for two of their respective spirit if a certain condition is met. This condition is almost always if your opponent has a certain number of cards in play or types of cards in certain positions, such as Elestrals at attack position or defense position or more enchanting spirits, but some just care if you have a general card in play like an artifact, so on and so forth. Now, while all these cards are quite strong in their own right, being the only two spirit Elestrals in the game so far that can be normal cast without having to be ascended, there are some that are still, of course, going to naturally be better than the others. So I thought it might be fun today if we went ahead and counted down the 8 Lith cards, now that we know all of them, from worst to best, and see which among them is the strongest Lith. Before we get into it real quick though, I really want to thank everyone for the support here on the second channel with all the Elestrals content. I really do appreciate it. So if you are interested in Elestrals or if you play the game, definitely make sure to go ahead and subscribe so that way you get more Elestrals videos. I'm not going to be doing them every single day like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel on my main channel, but ideally I will be uploading multiple times a week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right on in. And coming in at last place, number 8, in my opinion, the worst of the Liths, is actually going to be one of the new ones that was just revealed to be in Moonrise, and that is going to be Heliolith. Heliolith is a 2-wind spirit Elestral with 4 attack and 6 defense that says, this Heliolith can be normal cast with 2 wind spirits if an opponent has at least 2 face-down runes. When you cast this Heliolith, you can draw a card for each face-down rune on an opponent's field. I just want to start off first by pointing out and saying that just because this card, or, you know, some of the lower end Liths on here might be considered quote-unquote bad Liths, the bar for, you know, the Liths is actually pretty high as far as, like, the card quality, so just keep that in mind moving forward here. Cards I say are, you know, quote-unquote the worst or lower end on the tier Lith here are not necessarily going to be inherently bad cards. Heliolith, however, might be the only one where I don't just think this is the worst Lith. This might actually just be not that great of a card. Keep in mind, of course, this card isn't out yet, so this is entirely speculative, but a couple of problems with Heliolith. For one, with its effect. While it's not uncommon for your opponent to have at least 2 face-down runes, so this is, you know, relatively easy to summon. The issue here is that if your opponent chains either of those runes, right, then you do not get to draw. You draw a card for each face-down rune on an opponent's field, you know, as the effect resolves. So, for example, if your opponent had 2 face-down runes, one was a PTA and one was an Altar of Stars, then when you summon the Heliolith, they could, in theory, chain both to not only PTA your Heliolith, but alter, get the Nexus that they want anyway, and then now you're not drawing any cards. I think another thing that Heliolith really has going against it here is going to be its stat line, 4/6. So, fun fact about the Liths, all of their stat lines actually add up to 10. The 2 numbers, their attack and defense, always equal 10. So, the 4 attack, 6 defense split honestly is kind of one of the worst splits you could have. The 4 attack is particularly rough because, as a lot of you probably know, 5 is a pretty important number in Elestrals, as the sort of bar for attack, or stats in general really, for one spirit Elestrals is 5. So the fact that this Avith in attack mode gets run over by a very significant portion of the one spirit Elestrals that see play in the current meta is definitely not that great. But even from a more defensive standpoint, the defense of 6 really isn't that high either. You know, it's not hard for a lot of one spirit Elestrals with maybe an effect or their own effect or another, like, you know, Divine or another card to buff them, a Stadium maybe, to be able to overpower the Heliolith. And then that 6 defense is pretty much useless against, you know, just about any, I don't know about any, but most relevant 2-spirit or higher Elestrals, right? So I think for these reasons, Heliolith, unfortunately, really is just not going to be it once it comes out in Moonrise. There is a chance it might see play, I guess, in like very wind-heavy decks, but, you know, again, like I said, I don't think this card is like just a bad Lith. This is the one where I do kind of think this card, in general, might just not be that great. Okay, coming in at number 7, we have Heliolith. So this one was from the latest set, Daybreak. Heliolith is the Solar Lith. It is 2 Solar Spirits, 5 attack and defense. Once again, those stats adding up to 10 like every other Lith. This Heliolith can be cast with 2 Solar if an artifact is enchanted. When you cast this Heliolith, you can return an Elestral on the field to its owner's hand. So immediately, in my opinion, we're already in the territory where this is not a bad card, it just isn't great among the Liths in particular. One thing I do want to note about Heliolith's bounce effect, because I have actually played this card recently, and this has actually come up, is that it doesn't target, which is pretty good. But there are a few things that Heliolith does have going against it. The stats, kind of like the Aviolith, are going to be one of those things, right? It's an even split of the 10, 5 and 5, which means that a lot of the time, you know, as mentioned before, it's not difficult for 1-spirit Elestrals with a certain buff, whether it's a Stadium or a Demeter/Zeus or another card, to be able to run over this. Same with 2 and higher spirit Elestrals. A lot of them are just inherently going to be able to battle over this. Now, I will say that this card does have a natural advantage against high spirit Elestrals in that it can just bounce them, right? So it's very good reactively against that type of card, but it's not very good proactively necessarily for that reason. The bounce being limited to an Elestral is also a little bit rough. If you could bounce like a Stadium or especially a Divine and force your opponent to recast it, that'd be pretty huge. But bouncing back row would probably be a little bit too good. But I mean, even if it just had face-up card, I think this card would definitely be a fair bit better. The other issue that it has here is the requirement to be normal cast, right? This one needs an artifact in play. And at the current moment, there really just aren't that many great artifacts, let alone artifact-based decks. Especially with Solar. Solar does, of course, have Guardian of the Fleece, which is, of course, you know, the design direction for Heliolith. Solar has, of course, also the... is it Cyprimol? There's a card that can search it as well. So I think this was all intended to be part of that, like, Guardian of the Fleece package. But unfortunately, that does leave it, again, the design space a little bit narrow. Now, I will say, unlike a lot of Liths, I think maybe even all of the other ones, which require your opponent to have a certain condition met, you can actually meet the condition of your own Heliolith by having your own artifact in play. That said, you know, I really do think there are just better cards on this list. At this point in time that I'm recording this, Heliolith really hasn't seen that much play in, like, I don't even know if it's seen any play in, like, Top Cut tournament decks, but this is like all the other Liths, pretty much, but this one especially, like, as artifact runes get better, this card will definitely get better, so definitely do keep your eye on it. But of course, like I said, all the Lith cards are definitely worth keeping an eye on for sure. Okay, coming in at number 6, we have Coastalith, the Water Lith. Coastalith is a 2 Water Spirit Elestral with 2 attack and 8 defense. It says, this Coastalith can be normal cast with 2 water if an opponent has at least 2 Elestrals in defense position. When you cast this Coastalith, you can special cast a 1 Spirit Water Elestral from your hand. So, I will say that Coastalith only somewhat suffers the stat issue that Aviolith and Heliolith did. The 2 attack, of course, is not that great, but the 8 defense is pretty sizable. And I will also say that, like, you know, between the Atlantis as well, if you have the Stadium in play, that can be huge for Coastalith, bringing it up to a 4/10. Of course, that's true for all of the Liths, but for Coastalith especially, the 4 attack, while not perfect, is definitely, you know, very respectable, while still retaining the huge defense. But even without the Stadium, I still think putting this in defense mode is better than, definitely better than having, like, an Aviolith in defense mode, right? So, what are the problems with Coastalith? Why is it a little bit lower down on the tier list here? Well, the main issues, I think, are the requirements and the payoff here. They're so kind of drastic that a lot of people do consider Coastalith to be the worst of the Liths. I do think Heliolith is only a little bit worse right now because it doesn't really have a solid home, where Coastalith, even right now, is actually not that bad in very, very heavily water-focused decks. And with the Starbit coming out in the relatively near future, will definitely be another good improvement there. But yeah, no, having to have 2 Elestrals, your opponent having to have, rather, 2 Elestrals in defense position is actually kind of a big ask, I'm not gonna lie. It might not seem like it, but if you really think about it, a lot of the time, Elestrals kind of just get left in attack mode, because damage calc between 1 Spirit Elestrals doesn't really end up mattering, so, you know, when it comes to this game in particular, right, you're not always incentivized to turn to defense mode to avoid damage. Usually, you'll often just have an Elestral out in the mode of whatever stat is highest, right? Like, bunnies are often going to be in defense mode because they're 2/5s, but something like a 5/4 would probably just be, you know, left in attack mode a lot of the time. So, what this ends up meaning is that you often have to use, like, a Tsunami or some other card effects to get the Coastalith to be online, or you have to be so far ahead in terms of spirits that your opponent is wanting to put their stuff in defense mode inherently to avoid taking damage. Both of which are fairly niche situations. And of course the other sort of issue here is the payoff, right? You know, special casting a 1 Spirit Elestral from your hand is like, it's fine, you know, it's a fine effect. Of course, this is again why I say it'll be better with Starbit, because it can potentially special the Starbit Supernova from hand, which can't be normal cast and is a 1 Water Spirit Elestral with 7 attack, so that's pretty good payoff, right? But, you know, it does kind of beg the question, like, if you're really looking to special cast this 1 Spirit Water Elestral from your hand, why not just normal cast it instead of the Coastalith? Now, of course, the obvious answer is, well, if you normal cast the Coastalith, you get an extra 2/8 body. And that's not nothing. Of course, that is a, you know, good stat line to have just chilling on the field. But of course, then again, we have the problem of, okay, but in order to cast the Coastalith, your opponent has to have 2 defense mode dudes, which is just a big ask, honestly. So, yeah, I think this card is a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. I certainly don't think it is the worst Lith. Even before Aviolith came out, I do think this is slightly better than Heliolith currently. But, yeah, I think still, of course, obviously a fine card. Alright, coming in at number 5, we have Verth, the Earthlith. Verth is a 3/7, 2 Earth Spirit Elestral that says this Verth can be normal cast with 2 Earth Spirits if an opponent has at least 4 more spirits in their spirit deck than you do. When you cast this Verth, you can return up to 4 Earth Spirits from your underworld to your spirit deck. So, now, I would say from this point forward, we're getting into the territory where, like, the 5 remaining lists, including this one, are all actually just good cards. So, even though this Verth here is on the lower half of the tier list, whereas, like, Coastalith and Heliolith I would call, like, okay cards in a general sense, I think every other Lith moving forward is actually just a good card. So, Verth is another defensive Lith. I do like the 3/7 stat line. I think a lot more than both 2/8 and 4/6. I think for a defensive body, if you're going to split up the number 10 between attack and defense and make the defensive body, 3/7 is a really good place to be, because the 7 defense is still very sizable and quite difficult to get over, but the 3 attack can also get over a fair bit itself. And, I mean, you know, this was true with Coastalith as well. I think this is extra true for the Verth. If you have the Feloi Forest in play, this is a 5/9, which is a phenomenal stat line, regardless of what position you're in. So, the stat line, I think, is great here. The condition is slightly not always the easiest to beat, but at the same time, you know, what it means is that this Lith can be cast when you're behind, which is definitely a good thing, right? In general, to be able to cheat out a bigger dude when you're behind is definitely better than when you're ahead, which arguably Coastalith is that, right? And that's the big issue we talked about with Coastalith, is that its condition was hard to fulfill. And the effect here is quite good and correlates with the condition very well, of course. If you're behind on spirits, you're naturally going to want to heal, and Verth will heal you 4 Earth Spirits, which is quite a bit. The thing with Verth, and why I think it's not higher on the tier Lith, so to speak, is not only just the fact that the other lists just have, I think, more impactful effects, generally speaking, but also the fact that when it comes to, like, seeing play in their respective decks, Verth doesn't quite see that much play in main decks. In Earth Nexus builds, it's more often played in the side deck. I will say Verth is an excellent sideboard card, specifically for tournaments, right? Because, of course, in tournament rounds, you can very easily go into time, and then Verth ends up being better there, where you need more spirits in your deck than your opponent in order to win the game, right? Instead of just reducing their deck to 0. So, but the thing is, Verth doesn't see a lot of play in Earth Nexus main decks. Well, I don't know. It doesn't see like a... I don't know about that, actually, now that I mention it. It does probably see play in under 50% of Earth Nexus mains, but it's probably about 40. It's not that much lower, 40%. So it is definitely a card you could main deck one of if you really wanted to. Maybe two of, but you probably do want to side deck it. But being relegated to the side deck doesn't mean you're a bad card, of course. And this card doesn't even necessarily, again, only go in the side deck. All in all, Verth, I think, is the best of the defensive Liths. And moving forward, actually, I think all the other lists we're going to see have rather aggressive bodies, which I didn't even really notice until I looked at the list just now, but it's funny how the bottom 4 are the 4 more defensive lists. I guess Heliolith is a 5/5, so it's more even, but and then the aggressive ones, the ones with higher attack, are going to be higher on the countdown here. Alright, next up we got the other new Lith that will be coming out in Moonrise. So like the Heliolith at the bottom of the countdown here, this card is not yet out. So keep in mind, again, this is a bit speculative, but I am pretty confident in this placement. You probably, of course, know that I'm talking about Necrolith. And actually, I will say, when it comes to my confidence in placing this card at number 4, I think the only reason I may be unconfident is that this card might actually just be higher than that. So Necrolith is the Lunar Lith, a 2 Lunar Spirit Elestral with 7 attack and 3 defense that says, this Necrolith can be normal cast with 2 Lunar Spirits if an opponent has at least 2 suppressed cards. When you cast this Necrolith, you can destroy a suppressed Elestral. So first of all, right off the bat, 7/3, the inverse of the last stat line we saw in Verth, 3/7, is very, very good. A 7 attack Elestral that can be normal cast without having to ascend is very, very scary to think about. I will say the condition here, again, this is all very speculative because this card isn't out yet. I could see a world where this condition is a little bit difficult to fulfill. We have seen in Moonrise, and even outside of Moonrise, in Lunar cards we already have, like Spectaris and Dense Fog, that Lunar has a lot of ways to suppress, and it also has multiple ways to suppress multiple cards, again, such as Dense Fog. So in that regard, it might not end up being the most difficult if you're on like a dedicated Lunar/suppress deck, but I could see a world where maybe this isn't quite as good because it's a little difficult to meet that condition. That said, if you can meet that condition, oh goodness, you are just off to the races. Not only are you dropping that very aggressive 7/3 body, but you're also getting to destroy one of your opponent's Elestrals on top of it. That's wild. Also, this card doesn't target, by the way. It generally probably won't matter because the Elestral is suppressed, so if it has target protection, then that won't matter anyway. But I guess if there are cards outside of the suppressed one that would give target protection, that wouldn't matter here. In any case, I would expect Necrolith to definitely see, at the very least, heavy experimentation, if not dedicated play, in the upcoming Lunar/suppressed deck. So, definitely eager to see exactly how impactful the Necrolith ends up being. I feel like I might have even, like I said before, hedged a little bit low putting it at number 4, just because, again, I don't know how easy to fulfill the condition will be. But I definitely could see a world where it ends up being higher on the countdown here. Okay, coming in at number 3, we have Morlith. So Morlith is a card that actually is, this is going to be true of our next Lith as well, but this is a card that's so good that you can just build decks around it, right? Morlith is 2 Frost Spirits, 6 attack, 4 defense. This Morlith can be normal cast with 2 Frost Spirits if an opponent has fewer Elestrals in their underworld than you do. When you cast this Morlith, you must send the top 5 cards from your deck to your underworld. So at first glance, this might not seem like it's that great. Particularly the payoff, right? The on-cast effect of getting to mill for 5, you might think, well, wait, why would you want to mill yourself? Shouldn't this card be milling your opponent? Milling, of course, being sending cards from the top of the deck to the graveyard. But this is a case where Frost inherently has a lot of Underworld-based synergies, right? So, one, it's actually really easy, very, very easy, in fact, to fulfill the condition on Morlith. In fact, if you open Morfrost's Lycan form, you can just cast a Morlith on turn 1, which I think this might be the only Lith, with the exception of Heliolith in some weird situations, where you can, like, reliably cast this Lith on turn 1. This might be the only one. The 6/4 stat line is pretty great. Again, I didn't plan for this at all, but the top 3 Liths actually all have this stat line of 6 attack, 4 defense. This is so much better than Aviolith's 4 attack, 6 defense, right? The 6 attack means that it can reliably battle over pretty much any 1-spirit Elestral, and even if it gets turned to defense mode, the 4 defense, while not the most ideal, is still incredibly solid. Yeah, it makes so much of a difference, right? Because you might think, well, Aviolith is 4 attack, 6 defense. Is it really that different? And the answer is yes, because that 4 attack, like I said, you're really not able to be aggressive against, you know, those 1-spirit Elestrals. But Morlith absolutely has that capability. Being able to mill 5 of your own cards against sending them from the top of your deck to your Underworld is actually such a decently incentivizing payoff. I was going to just say decent, but it's like, it is actually a really good payoff, but it's more about the incentive, right? Because that'll turn on a lot of your graveyard synergies, which Frost, again, has a lot of, between, like, the Frost tricks, the Morfrost cards, like I mentioned. It'll also enable stuff like Rise from the Abyss, if you want to play that. Morlith, like I said, very, very easy to build a deck around this card, and I could see a world where this ends up being the best Lith over time, as it gets more and more synergies. All right, just 2 more to go here, and sitting at number 2 is going to end up being Archolith, the Thunderlith. So, Archolith is a 2 Thunder Spirit Elestral with 6 attack, 4 defense. That says this Archolith can be normal cast with 2 Thunder Spirits if an opponent has at least 2 Elestrals in attack position. When you cast this Archolith, you can enchant up to 3 Thunder Spirits from your Underworld to your field. The Unk. So I'll just say it, like, Archolith is probably just my favorite Elestrals card right now. I think it's really, really strong and a really, really cool effect. You might be wondering, isn't this just a worse Verdolith in terms of the payoff, right? Because Verdolith said you get to put 4 spirits back from your Underworld to your spirit deck, but this just lets you enchant 3 Thunder Spirits from your Underworld to your field. But, of course, you do have to note the difference between putting spirits back into your Underworld and enchanting them to your field. And enchanting them to the field is often quite a bit better than just putting them back into your Underworld. Archolith can do a number of things with this. For example, the most obvious example is it just puts the 3 Thunder Spirits on itself, right? Now you have a 6 attack Elestral with 5 spirits on it. If your opponent has a 1-spirit Elestral out, that's in attack mode, this would not only be able to battle over it, but then deal 4 spirits of damage to your opponent, which is absolutely bonkers. But even, honestly, in my opinion, better than using those spirits to throw around for damage, which can be a little risky. You know, trying to run into stuff like, or potentially running into stuff like Shield of Achilles or something like that, is using these spirits to be able to cast cards, right? Indeed, Monarch, a deck I've played a fair bit, and have seen a decent bit of success in tournament play, is the idea behind it is that you use the Thunder Spirits that Archolith puts on the board to cast either Thunderstorms or Nectar of the Gods, essentially for free. But even outside of decks focused specifically around this one card, in Thunder Nexus in general, which is arguably the strongest deck in the current Elestrals meta, you know, the Archolith is very, very good in that as well. Not only for putting Thunder Spirits on itself, you could put Thunder Spirits on things like Mount Olympus or Zeus. Zeus especially, you could not only potentially use Zeus's effect more, but you also then have the Thunder Spirits to, you know, much like I said before, cast cards with or Nexus around, right? Now there's a lot of Thunder Nexusing going on right now. Rip Spark it. Another actually fun thing you can do is putting 3 Thunder Spirits on a Boombat, which is funny because Boombat's actually featured in Archolith's art, but That would give your Boombat plenty of opportunities to survive after popping cards in the field. Even better if you have a Mount Olympus in play, where your Boombat is a 6/5 that'll go down to a 5/4 to pop a card. Very, very strong. Yeah, overall, I think that Arclith is very good at what it does in terms of not only being like a fun build-around in and of itself, but also is just a good Thunder card in general. Yeah, I mean, oh, and the condition, I haven't talked about that. Very easy to fulfill, you know. Oh, and the condition, I haven't really talked about that. Very, very easy to fulfill. You know, unlike Coith, which, you know, your opponent's not going to often have Elestrals in defense mode, they're almost always left out in attack mode. And this is also a better comeback card for that reason, because if you're in a game state where you're behind, your opponent's probably going to have 2 Elestrals in attack mode. It's also nice that you can have as many Elestrals on the field, like up to 3. It doesn't matter how many you have as long as your opponent just has 2 in attack mode. So yeah, Arclith, very cool, very strong card. Love it, love it, love it. Which of course means, to probably nobody's surprise, that the #1 Lith is going to be the Fire Lith Lavalith. Lavalith is a 2 Fire Spirit Elestral with 6 attack and 4 defense. That says this Lavalith can be normal cast with 2 Fire Spirits if an opponent has at least 2 more Enchanting Spirits than you do. When you cast this Lavalith, you can target and destroy a rune. So again, you're probably not surprised about this at all. I probably don't even need to say that this is the best Lith, because this is not only the only Lith that is limited to 1, but one of only 3 cards currently in the entire game that is limited to 1, and for good reason. The condition for Lavalith is not only criminally easy to fulfill, but actually, between the condition and the effect, put the metagame in a situation where 2 rune types overall, Stadiums and Divines, you were just not incentivized to play them. Because think about it, right? If you have a Divine or a Stadium rune in play, they're going to have at least 1 Enchanting Spirit under them. And odds are, you're probably going to have at least 1 dude in play that has at least 1 Enchanting Spirit under them. Boom, now you have 2 Enchanting Spirits on the field, and if your opponent has nothing, which is not hard, you know, if they're early on in the game especially, or if they only have face-down cards, then boom, they can just slam down the Lavalith from hand. And not only that, but they can then destroy the Divine or the Stadium rune that helped cast the Lavalith. So, I think that's a large portion of why Lavalith got limited and why it was a very warranted limit. You know, even with the condition that has to have 2 more Enchanting Spirits than you do, it still ended up being the easiest condition to fulfill, like I said. Of course, it's got that 6/4 stat line, so very good in that regard as well. And destroying runes is a very, very powerful effect, you know, in Elestrals in general, right? So especially to be putting on a 2-spirit body that can be normal cast very easily, that's also very well statted. Yeah, it all makes a lot of sense why Lavalith is not only the best Lith, but also why it's, you know, limited to 1. And there we have it. There are the 8 Liths ranked from worst to best. So what do you all think? I would love to get your opinions on what is the worst or best Lith in the comment section below. Well, we all know it's Lavalith, right? I don't think many people would argue that Lavalith isn't the best Lith, so maybe if you want to argue what the second best Lith is. But, in any case, I really do got to thank you for watching, especially if you watched all the way to the end of the video. That's actually the best way by far to support the channel, so I really, really do appreciate it. Again, if you're into Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, you want to check out my main channel, linked below, which is much bigger than this one currently, although I do want to grow this one to hopefully be of a similar size. And, of course, if you want to support the channel in additional ways, there are links to my Patreon, and my main channel has YouTube memberships. Again, link to those is going to be in the description below. But thanks as always for watching. I really do appreciate you, and that'll do it. So this is Hexlex. I'm signing out, hoping that you have a fantastic day.